Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today you're going to learn all about server-side rendering in Next.js. If you didn't know what it is, don't worry, I've got you covered in less than 10 minutes. Roll the intro. Before we get started, let's talk about today's video sponsor, Brilliant. The amazing team over at Brilliant actually built an incredible platform which offers an extensive list of courses covering all the STEM modules. They've got your science, technology, engineering, and maths down. If you ever wanted to go ahead and master any of these areas, this is a great place to start. So here's a couple of reasons why I personally would recommend using Brilliant. I personally like to learn through hands-on application, hence why we have a lot of clones on this channel. You can learn interactively by actually having hands-on experiences inside of the Brilliant lessons. Drag and drop interactive demos to go ahead and learn one of the many concepts that they offer. Brilliant is amazing for all levels. So whether you're a beginner or whether you're advanced, they've got you covered. You can learn anything, whether it's cryptocurrency or computational biology. These guys have got a huge range of courses available. I specifically love the cryptocurrency module. So I wanted to know more about the hashing function, how this kind of stuff works. And we actually use this in the Web 3.0 build. The guys over at Brilliant have hooked us up. The first 200 people are going to get 20% off their annual memberships. So hurry, because that is going to go extremely fast. First link in the description. Make sure you check out Brilliant today. Jumping straight into the lesson, we're going to learn about server-side rendering in Next.js. When you typically use React without any framework like Next.js, what happens is the entire bundle gets delivered to the user anytime they come to the website. This is okay in the beginning, but as your app gets bigger, it starts to get slower to actually go ahead and visit the website, as the entire bundle will have to go ahead and get loaded. When a user visits your website, the biggest delay is actually when the JavaScript loads. So what you tend to see is you'll visit a website and you'll tend to see a spinner or a loading message when the actual JavaScript is pulling in the data that needs to be on the screen. So the problem with this is the UX isn't really great, right? The user experience is not what we want. We want to come to a website and bam, it's there, it works. This is where Next.js comes in. Introduce a technique called server-side rendering. What happens here is when a user visits the web page, that individual page is going to get built. And notice I said the individual page, as Next.js does page splitting by default. So that one page is going to go ahead and get pre-built on a really fast server such as Vercel. When we deploy to Vercel, this is how it works. So the benefit of this is that high-speed server has great internet, is very fast, and its primary job is to simply go ahead and pre-build this page, whereas the browser is not. This results in a much faster page being loaded. The time to interact on your page is extremely fast, and you have a much better user experience. So the user comes onto your app and immediately they'll see a web page. There's no loading indicator or spinners to be seen. This also, as a side effect, increases your SEO performance. So when Google web crawlers come to your page, instead of seeing a loading state, they get the entire page at once. Now, yes, they can support PWAs and they do wait for a little bit, but it actually does increase your score when you implement something like server-side rendering. Without further ado, let's jump straight into a build. And by the end of this, you're going to be able to implement your first server-side rendered page. So first thing you want to do is type in npx create next app. And then you want to go ahead and give your project a name. Then what you want to do is cd into that directory. So cd SSR demo or whatever you've called it. And what I love to do is type in code dot. So once you're inside of VS Code, what you want to do is go over to pages, head over to index.js. So what we're actually going to go ahead and do is spin up this app. So Command J opens up our terminal, and what you want to do is npm run dev. This will go ahead and spin up your website. So what I'm now going to do is pull this over onto the right hand side of my screen. So as you can see, I've got my Next.js app loaded. So I'm going to give you an example of how we initially would pull data inside of a traditional React application. We're going to have a piece of state that's going to pull in a bunch of to-dos from an external API. So we're going to say to-dos, set to-dos equals use state, like so, and we're going to import use state, and we're going to initialize it with an empty array value. And then we're going to go ahead and actually fetch some data using a use effect. So here I've got a use effect snippet. We're not going to have any dependency inside of our use effect, and we have to make sure that we import it. So we've imported use effect and use state from React. So in this case, I can say fetch to-dos equals async, and then we're going to go ahead and make an inner function. I'm going to type in const res equals await fetch, and I'm going to go ahead and pull the data in from an external API. So I've got this awesome to-dos API over here. which comes from JSON placeholder. Once we've gone and done that, I need to go ahead and pass the data. So in this case, I need to go ahead and wait for the response.json. This will go ahead and give me the data and the list of to-dos that I can go ahead and use. Once we get to this point, I actually need to go ahead and set the to-dos in my state to the data that we receive back. And I need to go ahead and execute this function to make sure that it runs. So how do I go ahead and actually display the to-dos on the page? Simply have a ternary operator which says to-dos.length. If the length is equal to 0, so it hasn't fetched the to-dos yet, then I'm going to go ahead and say it's got a loading state. Otherwise, what I want to do is actually show the to-dos on the screen. So in this case, I can go ahead and say to-dos.map, and for every single to-do, I simply want to go ahead and render out the to-do on the screen. So just like so, I've got a div where the key is the to-do ID, and then we've got the p tag with the ID and the title. So if I hit save now, you can see that initially, if I refresh the page, there's a loading state. You can see it very quickly. There's a loading sort of glimpse. We don't like that loading state, right? That loading state gets quite irritating. And if we want to emphasize this a bit further, we can go ahead and actually put in a timeout to go ahead and show you the effect that this actually has. So if I was to do the same function over in my to-do, imagine if I had a slow internet connection, example of a 3-second timeout here. So if I go ahead and refresh, imagine I had a slow internet, this is what my user would see. 3 seconds later, boom, the data would come in. That's not ideal, right? We don't want that user experience for our user, and Google web scrapers may not stick around for that long. That means our SEO is going to get damaged as a result. So how do we implement server-side rendering? Well, it's actually quite simple. The first thing I want to do is actually going to go ahead and comment all of this out. And we're going to go ahead and actually comment this out for now while we get everything prepared. So we're back to our base screen. And what you need to do when you want to implement server-side rendering is simply go ahead and include a special function called get server-side props. If we simply include this function and we export it from our component, then Next.js knows to handle this specific page, so in this case, the home page, as a server-side rendered page. In this case, I can go ahead and say export async function get server-side props. And in this case, it's an empty function. I'm going to go ahead and actually take my previous code. So where I done the fetch, I'm going to go ahead and take that and cut it and pop it over here like so. I've got the same simple logic. I make a fetch to this external API. I get the data back. I pass it as JSON. How do I get that over to my component? So my home component. Well, it's actually very simple. Whenever we do that server-side render, what we can actually do is return something called props. So if you've used React before, you'd be very familiar with props, and all of the information that gets pre-rendered on the server is actually available to us as props. All we have to do is simply return an object with props inside as a key. And then inside of here, we can simply put in the data. In this case, I actually want to rename this and have the key as to-dos, and I want to go ahead and pass in the data like so. Inside of our functional component, we get props. What we can do here is destructure the to-dos out of the props. And as you can see, this is already a little bit cleaner than what we previously had. And now what I can do is I can go ahead, uncomment this out, and I need to go ahead and protect myself because initially when it tries to build the page, to-dos may be undefined. So in this case, where I have to-dos, I'm going to use optional chaining. So that way, if it's undefined, it will not freak out. It'll be a safe way of handling the variable. Now, if I go over to my page, so localhost 3000, and I refresh, as you can see, there was no loading indicator. And I'm going to emphasize this again. If I refresh, look what happens. As soon as I come onto the page, I get the list of to-dos. So as you can see, server-side rendering is exactly as I mentioned before. It will pre-build the page on the server per request. So every time a user comes, it builds a fresh page and it will deliver it to the user. This is insanely powerful and there are many benefits. So faster page loading, faster page rendering, there's less time to interact. Right? So in which case the user comes to your page, they can immediately start interacting with the page. They don't have to wait. It's better SEO performance. So Google, when they come and scrape the site, they're going to get immediately all the information available. And these are just a handful of tips, right? There's a lot more benefits as this brings. So this has been your introduction to server-side rendering in Next.js. Hopefully you can see the massive benefit it has on your app, and it makes the user experience way better in my opinion. So with that said, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Smash the thumbs up button if you had. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. Turn on your bell notification icon so you don't miss any hidden gems like this in the future. And as always, guys, I will see you in the next video. Peace.